All right, cool. So this is one that I'm not sure how many people will experience, but I do know there is a market for it. And essentially what this is mixed use. So this is a deal I looked at around last year. It was under contract, or someone else got it under contract, but I was interested in this one. I did underwrite this, and I did also believe, pretty sure I offered on this one. Um, Anyone that doesn't know, mixed use is essentially just commercial in combination with residential, where you have both. This one, for example, you had a CVS downstairs plus a couple offices, and then units upstairs. I know a lot of the details about this, and I think I remember a good amount, so I'll be able to give more specifics, examples pertaining to this one that more than others. I know I've talked about this not recently, but I've used this property as an example a couple times. So if anyone has any questions, let me know. If I'm repeating myself, also let me know. So this is essentially what the structure looked like. You had the multifamily here, a CVS, which was a very big tenant, obviously. The basement, and I'll kind of later on go into how this is important or a factor in the equation. And then you have two offices slash retail spaces here, and then you can see the square footage. That's pretty big for any size, but especially commercial space. And obviously CVS is CVS. So here is the simple part, like the very straightforward, where you have the rent for the multifamily, just the residential side. This is a much less simple and more complicated retail tenant situation. Few things that are really important to look at and keep in mind here. Obviously the rents and the terms. Reimburse 64% of the property tax bill. Also a big component. Renewal options. Also important. And then the rent. And any increases. Reimbursement. And then this is one factor that I had never experienced or seen until I saw this one, where tenant pays 3% of sales greater than 6 million. Landlord has right to terminate lease if they elect to demolish and redevelop the building, which is also pretty convenient. This wasn't necessarily an option with this building because the units were so brand new. It would have kind of been working backwards to a certain extent. So that was not really considered on our end. Traditionally, you just have your pro formas here, what you could potentially get. Income assumptions, which are always good to look at when the broker has them here, just so you get an idea. Other resident fees and assumptions, expense assumptions, retail income breakdown. This is important to consider and like kind of get a good understanding of, just given what the expenses are and then the income. The vacancy allowance, I think, is more like much bigger long term. Like you're not gonna have that once you have these locked in for a good period of time. So there's that. And then like the reimbursement through the sales is explained here. 3% of sales greater than 6 million, analysis based on last year's sales of 9.4. Obviously, that's a big difference. 3% of that's a nice number. So again, don't worry too much about the actual numbers of this. What is really interesting with this is just the creativity and different options you could have with a commercial or retail or any non-residential lease, and how that affects your bottom line. You will kind of get that sense of like security there as well, knowing you're gonna have them locked in for a long period of time. Where it gets really interesting and a little harder to predict, I would say, is how the rent rates increase, how it keeps up with the market, and if it falls behind, you're not as happy. If it's ahead of it, then you're obviously happy. So that's another interesting thing when it comes to mixed use in general. So something to keep in mind there. And then I have a few of these tabs open. This is the rent roll. And then you have the CVS base rent. And then the income reimbursement. And vacancy. And then you have your total. This is the income statement. So you get an idea of all the different fees. The reimbursed utilities, which is nice. Rent loss. And then your expenses. So it's very similar in that sense. And then here's like the breakdown of how the CVS kind of operated. Have you guys looked at or even considered mixed use? I do think there are advantages to it. Obviously, depending on what the idea is, what your intention is, you may get different depreciation and general benefits as well. Which I don't know too much about, but I do think that those are options. And then you do get a lot more reimbursements. For example, there's mention of property tax, there's mention of the sales reimbursement, which is cool. And that's just all additional income that factors into the equation. So one thing I wanted to mention regarding this, and like a few obstacles you may have when you're dealing with commercial, especially someone as big as like a CVS or any of those big retailers. Future development air rights. Anyone familiar with, or if anyone's not familiar with air rights, essentially what it is the air rights allow you to or not to build in this space, which is dependent on who owns that space, right? Same way as if you own land, you own everything above it up to a certain height, depending on zoning and who holds the air rights. Another thing I mentioned earlier was the basement. Now, this is all from what I heard from the broker. So this is kind of like word of mouth, and this specific scenario may not always be the case, but it's something to keep in mind. And you don't know what you don't know until you experience it. And this was one of those situations. These units potentially that could have been built here could not be done until CVS agrees. Why? Because you need to redevelop, not re-support the foundation and the XYZ, which requires more work and access to the CVS physical pharmacy, which could lead to closure time, which obviously is not a good thing for CVS, especially a CVS that's always open. So that was kind of the reasoning why this had future outlook and couldn't have much, like it's not a short-term upside. It's kind of hopefully one day that's a possibility. The timeline still up in the air. The basement. This was also mentioned that CVS wasn't using it much. The idea was using this basement kind of like a New York style underground, whatever you want, or can rent it out for, essentially. Obviously, if this is 8,100 square feet, your basement's going to be big. Now, was the full thing a basement? I'm not sure, but regardless, you have a lot of space, and whatnot. So there's a lot of upside there. Ironically, this management company was the one who properly managed this, which is fairly convenient. And then your long-term upside is right here. This CVS actually are maybe not not as big of an impact as you may think, but at the end of the day, you're trying to make this as attractive as possible to increase that. The better CVS does at that point, the better it is for you, given the fact that their sales do benefit you with that reimbursement. Obviously, that can change. So that's gonna be my next point. When you have something in your lease, such as that reimbursement percentage, I do know there's in this situation it was a case where that 6 million number could increase. So in a couple of years, it would have been higher, and then you would have made less unless their total sales increase as well. Also, someone like CVS, it's rare they're going to negotiate a bad deal. So they're going to usually have some favorable terms, such as options, the $6 million sales, everything above that. They have a little more leverage on that with the ability to increase that number periodically. And at the end of the day, they're going to be there a long time. Also, someone such as this, Lease, and like for example, this one ended in 33 and it started in 80. That's crazy. So you can imagine they've been there longer than most people, and they've also had a lot of kind of stuff implemented into the lease to make it favorable for them, incentivize them to stay. They bring foot traffic, they make a lot of money, obviously. And it is kind of convenient to have when you have tenants because it's a selling point to any tenant living upstairs, usually. And then you can see here they have like 10 years left on there. So that's the interesting part about the mixed use component of retail, like just this investment space in general, is you have a little more factors to consider. The lease for the commercial is a lot more in depth, especially with CVS. Just given how long it is, how many details it goes into, how many factors there are, so on and so forth. Any questions on that? Or in general with mixed use? Has anyone looked at it, considered it, been interested by it? No? Okay. So this is kind of generally what I was just going briefly skim through. Didn't think I'd get through that fast. Does anyone just have general questions?